Hey guys, today is January 8th, which means that we're reading John chapter 7. Now, John chapter 7 has a lot of parts, but there's a couple things that we need to know before we read John chapter 7. John chapter 7 really starts around his second year of ministry. So even though we've only read six chapters of John, we've already kind of covered a whole year of ministry. John doesn't really cover all the things that Jesus did like Matthew, Mark, and Luke at the very beginning. He's kind of the last year guy. So when it comes to this, a lot of time has passed that we don't necessarily read in John. That's why we have to read Matthew, Mark, and Luke too. But when it comes to chapter 7, there's a festival going on in Jerusalem known as the Festival of Booths or the Festival of Tabernacles. Basically, this is celebrated the time of the wandering, the wilderness, being out there. They would set up these tents or these booths, and they would kind of live in those and celebrate as a remembrance of what Israel did way back in the Old Testament. Well, as this was going and everybody went to this in Jerusalem, Jesus' brothers told him that he should go to Judea and do some miracles there so that everybody could see and know him and see all of his power. Well, Jesus basically says, well, if you want them to know so bad, why don't you go there and tell them about me and all the things that I've done? And so they definitely don't want to do that. They'll go on to Jerusalem, and we see that Jesus goes on to Jerusalem behind them without them knowing it. He kind of just walks along behind them without them knowing what's going on. And in the evening, he kind of goes around Jerusalem, is doing these things. But then while he's trying to kind of keep it on the lowdown, he goes to the temple and he starts to preach. And as he's preaching in the temple, of course, the Pharisees and all the temple priests and all of those people, they get pretty mad because he's teaching the way that he's teaching, what he's been doing the whole time. And so we can see when it starts into verse 25, we kind of get this idea where the people that are listening are saying, well, can he be the Messiah? Maybe he is, maybe he's not. And they're like, well, he's still from Galilee. He's not that big. He's not that thing. He's not that powerful. He's just a normal kind of common guy. And so what happens is the church sends the police out to arrest him. And when the police go out to arrest Jesus, they're hearing him preach. And they just start to listen, and they listen, and they listen, and they eventually come back to the church, and the priests are like, how come you didn't arrest him? And the police say, well, basically, we've never heard anybody teach like this. It was pretty amazing to hear him preach. We didn't see anything that was wrong. And then in verse 37, we kind of get a glimpse of what he's been preaching. It's basically saying that he is the living water. The same message that he did with the woman at the well, the Samaritan woman, the same message of basically him being the bread of life, that whoever eats or drinks of him will not perish. He's kind of using this illustration a lot, but if it's working, why change it? Everybody understands food. Everybody understands water. And so it was just a parable that he was using. And so that's kind of the message that he was preaching. And apparently it was working because the police were amazed by what he was saying. And then we get at the very bottom, we kind of get this big division going on. And so people were saying, well, is he a prophet? Others said he's the Christ. Others said he's the Christ to come. All this is going on. And basically, Jesus says, you guys known about me for forever. The Old Testament speaks of me. The Old Testament says that I'm going to be born in Bethlehem, that I'm going to come from the line of David. I'm going to be born in Galilee, because this was the biggest hold up for them. And so Jesus points out these prophecies that says, hey, I am exactly what the Old Testament has been teaching about. And so the officials kind of say, man, we've never heard anything about this. But the crowd knows, and they come and they basically saying, hey, we need to kill him. We need to kill him. And then verse 50, we see this guy. We've already read about him once in John chapter 3, Nicodemus, the Pharisee who sits on the Sanhedrin. He comes out in front of all the Pharisees and says, guys, we can't do this. We have to try him before we kill him. We have to give him what is due. That is the law. And so basically, all the Pharisees, they reply back in verse 52 and said, well, are you from Galilee too? Almost like, are you in cohorts with this? Just let us kill him. Don't worry about the rules. Don't worry about the laws. This guy's against us. And so it's kind of how chapter 7 ends. But in some of your Bibles, you might see a verse 53. Chapter 7, verse 53 is in brackets. As long as, and 2, when we get into chapter 8, verses 1 through 11, they're in these brackets. What these brackets mean is when we found the Dead Sea Scrolls, they weren't in there. We don't have these in the earliest manuscripts. So some Bibles have these verses in there, some Bibles don't. And it just depends on what you believe and how you feel. But we're going to go on and read them. But verse 53 of 7 doesn't really give us much information. It's really the rest of the story will be in tomorrow's reading in chapter 8. And we'll talk a little bit more about that. But you know what, guys? We are on day 8. We've done great. We had a great Sunday at First Baptist yesterday, a big crowd, and I'm just loving what we're doing this. I hope God is doing something great in your life. God bless. We'll see you tomorrow.